Welcome. This is the Wealth Rabbi, and my mission is to bring truth and values to the world of wealth. You know, there's been an incredibly heated debate about the whole question of putting limits on executive pay, particularly in the financial sector, where chief executives and directors of major corporations have up till now been benefiting from colossal telephone number salaries and bonuses. And I wanted to share with you an insight and a contribution to this debate, which is to be found in this week's forthcoming reading of Parsha Shoftim. The Sedra addresses itself to the issue of the powers and the correct appointment of a king. And what's fascinating is that we read in chapter 17, in verse 17, "And he shall not greatly increase silver and gold for himself." The Torah here prohibits the king using his powers and the authority which is vested in him in order to amass personal wealth. He is purely a servant of the people. Now, what's really interesting is the commentators describe why this is the case. And by the way, we should first note that this is unique in the ancient world, where we see such limits put on a king's powers, where typically monarchs and despots would use their office to amass great personal wealth. And for that matter, that continues in many parts of the world, where presidents and prime ministers, particularly in more corrupt nations, use the powers of their office to sequester away for themselves great personal wealth and resources which really belong to the people that they are supposed to be ruling. Now, in terms of why is this the case? Why is a king prohibited from amassing personal wealth? Well, there are two different approaches. The first approach and explanation is given by the great Torah commentator Nachmanides, who says that the prohibition here is based on the fact that great wealth leads to arrogance and hubris. And in fact, we read it just a few verses later on that a king has to have a Sefer Torah, which accompanies him, his personal scroll, which accompanies him everywhere that he goes, so that he can look within it and his heart, to quote, does not become haughty over his brethren and not turn from the commandments right or left. So for Nachmanides, the prohibition of the king amassing personal wealth whilst he is king over his subjects is to prevent arrogance and hubris. Perhaps in a modern context we could say that a chief executive is very much almost akin to the king of his company or his corporation, and it may well be that one of the most important functions of the non-executives and the board of the company is to keep a check on his becoming arrogant, smug, or complacent. It would be interesting to see how one could actually create some concrete tools in order, if you will, to measure a CEO's or a director's arrogance index. But nevertheless, that's the first approach. The second approach is to be found in the commentary of the Ibn Ezra. The Ibn Ezra says that the prohibition is because what the Torah is concerned about is that if the king is hell-bent on pursuing personal wealth, he will increase taxation upon the populace, upon his people, to the point that it becomes excessive. And therefore the Torah's concern is that the people shouldn't suffer as a result of the personal ambitions of the king. So likewise, in the modern context, it may well be that the board, who represent shareholders, should make sure that the rewards that the CEO and the directors, the executive directors, are drawing from the company should not be excessive to the point that shareholders or other employees or stakeholders suffer. What I find really fascinating, though, is that Maimonides, in his great halachic work, the Mishnah Torah, when discussing the laws pertaining to a king, actually says that if a king transgresses this commandment and uses his office to amass personal wealth, he is liable to the punishment of lashes. And the Sanhedrin has the right, and in fact is mandated, to serve this punishment upon him. This is truly extraordinary, certainly in the ancient world, and indeed in the modern world, where we should see that such sanctions should be taken against a leader who abuses his office for personal gain. So I think the Torah's wisdom has much to say about these issues, particularly the issue of the conflict of interest between serving as the leader of a company or of a country and pursuing one's own personal gain. So this is the Wealth Rabbi, bringing the truth and values from a Jewish perspective to the world of wealth. Thank you for listening.